Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Amy Morris. Here are the stories we're following today.
We begin in Washington, where the federal government is less than 5 days away from another partial government shutdown deadline. Now the White House has set up a meeting to try to raise the pressure on a major sticking point, billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
On the list of attendees, a number of key congressional leaders like House Speaker Mike Johnson, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Senate leaders Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell. Now, the White House says Biden wants to discuss the urgency of passing the $60 billion request for U.S. emergency Ukraine aid, as well as the looming deadline to fund the government. Speaker Johnson's grasp on the speakership is tenuous. Part of his dilemma is he could lose it if he pushes for Ukraine aid without border. The meeting is set for tomorrow. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thank you, Ed. Now to the latest in the Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he'll have a plan to move civilians out of the southern Gaza city of Rafah before going in to dismantle remaining Hamas battalions in the city. Netanyahu says there's no disagreement between Israel and the U.S. on this point.
We agree on this. I mean, we don't have to be prodded. We're on the same page with the U.S. on this because that's how we do it.
Prime Minister Netanyahu was on CBS's Face the Nation. We get more on this from Bloomberg senior editor Bill Ferries.
The big deadline we have to keep in mind is March 10th. That's when Israel says if the remaining hostages haven't been released, they will go forward with that ground offensive in Rafah. And March 10th also coincides with the start of Ramadan, so that would raise a lot of criticism, additional criticism of Israel from much of the Muslim world and the wider world as well.
Bloomberg's Bill Ferries. Meantime, the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, Mohammed Shtayyeh, says he and his government will resign, but it's not clear if Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will accept that.
Turning to politics back home, Amy. First, Wall Street considered Ron DeSantis. Then it went for Nikki Haley. Now, the Republican donor class is confronting a reality its wealthy members had hoped to avoid, being limited to exerting their clout in the election cycle only through state-level races. Donald Trump's victory in the South Carolina Republican primary has moved the former president closer to claiming his party's nomination, and now the powerful Koch network has announced it will no longer fund Haley's campaign. This is a major reversal that underscores traditional donors' inability to slow Donald Trump's momentum.
Adding to that momentum for Donald Trump, another key endorsement. John Thune, the second-ranking Republican in the Senate, is backing the former president in his bid for the White House. The South Dakota senator had resisted joining Trump's allies until now, and he's questioned Trump's strength as a general election candidate.
All right, let's get back to markets now, Amy. Futures, as you mentioned, are lower as we begin a new trading week. Both the Dow and the S&P 500 ended last week at records, while the Nasdaq slipped from its all-time high. Caterina Simonetti, Senior Vice President at Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management, says investors have a tough dilemma during this market rally.
What we're seeing as the biggest trap to try to avoid is when investors are starting to doubt their diversified portfolios, starting to doubt asset allocation, and are kind of saying, like, should we stay with blue chip stocks? Should we stay diversified, or should we switch direction into this highest growing stocks? And that's what, these are the type of conversations that we're having, at the beginning of this year.
Caterina Simonetti of Morgan Stanley Private Wealth says investors will be focusing on a busy week of data, including the Federal Reserve's preferred measure of inflation.
And stock markets may be hitting records, but Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway is having some trouble finding places to invest. Bloomberg's John Tucker joins us with those details.
And Amy, Buffett says there are no deals out there that could deliver eye-popping performance, so he's keeping Berkshire's cash close at hand. And that pile of cash has grown to a record $167.6 billion. In his annual shareholder letter, the 93-year-old Buffett says there remain only a handful of companies in this country capable of truly moving the needle at Berkshire, and they have been endlessly picked over. The company also reported fourth quarter operating earnings of $8.48 billion. That was helped by an increase in insurance underwriting earnings and investment income. Berkshire shares are up 17% so far this year. They've touched a record in each of the past 7 trading days. I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thanks. Now, the most actively traded stock this morning is Intuitive Machines. We told you about the moonshot the company's shares had on Friday following its lunar landing. The stock surged surged as much as 43% before ending Friday nearly 16% higher. This morning, though, Intuitive Machines is crashing back to earth. The stock is plunging more than 34%. Officials now say that lander, nicknamed Odysseus, likely landed on its side.
And we do have some deal news this morning. Alcoa has made a $2.2 billion offer to acquire its Australian joint venture partner, Alumina. The deal would give the U.S. aluminum giant full control of Alcoa, World Alumina and Chemicals, one of the world's largest producers of the semi-processed form of that metal.
In Asia, Ant Group is said to have outbid Citadel for Credit Suisse's investment bank in China. Bloomberg Daybreak Asia anchor Brian Curtis has the details from Hong Kong.
A big surprise. Sources say Ant made a stronger bid than what Citadel offered back in December. The bid by Ant to build a securities business using the Swiss bank's operations will face a serious review. In the past, China said it favored a foreign buyer to open up the sector to more foreign competition. UBS, which owns Credit Suisse, would then have to decide, not knowing if regulators would greenlight the local offer. And other players may enter the fray as well. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thanks, Brian. And Bloomberg News has learned the Walt Disney Company has signed a binding pact with Reliance Industries to merge their media operations in India. Disney's been grappling with challenges in India, like retaining subscribers and securing media assets. Together, the two companies would make a formidable media behemoth in one of the world's fastest growing entertainment markets.
Now it's time to take a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we bring in Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. New York Governor Kathy Hochul's mandate that the state moves to zero-emission school buses is getting pushback by some state Senate Republicans and local officials. They believe the entire transition scheduled for 2035 is not affordable on its current timeline. State Senator Stephen Rhodes spoke with other officials at a gathering in Levittown yesterday.
Some of the reason why we're here, encouraging the governor, encouraging the state legislature to pump the brakes on this electric bus mandate until the technology catches up and until we have an actual plan to be able to implement this.
The measure, which passed in the 2022-23 New York State budget, would also bar school districts from purchasing diesel-fueled buses at the end of June of 2027. We're learning more details about a deadly fire in New York City that left one person dead and required firefighters to rescue trapped residents. The two-alarm blaze erupting in the Harlem neighborhood Friday also left 17 people hurt. Investigators in New York say a lithium-ion battery is to blame. Reaction continues after the Alabama Supreme Court's decision that frozen embryos should be considered people. The state's Republican governor now says she's working on a solution with GOP lawmakers to protect IVF access in the state. As of now, families in Alabama have been left waiting as the implications of the court decision are being felt across the country. Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois is a past user of IVF.
In my case, when we had 5 fertilized eggs and 3 were non-viable, when my doctor discarded those with my consent, that would be considered potentially manslaughter or murder. Basically, Republicans have put the rights of a fertilized egg over the rights of the woman. And that is not something that I think the American people agree with.
Senator Duckworth spoke on ABC's This Week, heard Sundays on Bloomberg. There are more details on what killed beloved Flacco the owl. Mourners in New York are now leaving flowers and letters for the Eurasian eagle owl at his favorite tree in Central Park. Flacco's flight to stardom began in February of last year when someone broke into the Central Park Zoo and freed him. He spent the last year out of captivity and became part of the talk of not just New York, but the nation. It's believed Flacco flew into the window of a building and suffered fatal injuries Friday. Emily Einhorn is with the Wild Bird Fund.
He suffered a double concussion, first from colliding with the window, and then he actually, unfortunately, face planted onto the pavement.
One member of an animal rights group said Flacco captured the world's attention. Everybody was rooting for him. Global news, 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg Nathan.
Okay, Michael, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. Here's John Stashower.
Thanks, Nathan. The Rangers lost at the Garden of Vegas back on January 26th, and they lost February 25th in Columbus. In between, they played 10 games and won all 10. The win Saturday in Philadelphia tied the club record for longest win streak, but then they had to travel, play again last night, and the Blue Jackets scored 3 times second period and won 4-2. Ranger coach Peter Laviolette asked about playing back-to-back.
When we needed to win a game tonight, there's no excuses with the schedule. The schedule's a schedule. Everybody catches back-to-back. You're expected to be able to handle that. And tonight wasn't our best. We'll learn from it. We play the same opponent, and so we'll look to fix some things and get back at it.
Rangers and Blue Jackets play again Wednesday at MSG, where yesterday St. John's upset 15th-ranked Creighton 80-66. The same Creighton team that had just beaten UConn, the unanimous number 1 team in the nation, by 19. The same St. John's team that last Sunday blew a 19-point lead at Seton Hall, their 8th loss in 10 games. That's the game that led their coach Rick Pitino to call the St. John's players unathletic. Pitino said then that this was the most unenjoyable experience of his life. Yesterday, Pitino wore a white suit. Seemed to enjoy the win. NBA, the Warriors lost to Denver. The Wizards lost to Cleveland. And Tampa, Juan Soto in pinstripes for the first time hit a 3-run opposite field homer off the scoreboard. Aaron Judge, 2 hits in his 2 at-bats. He played center field and was then replaced by top prospect 6'6" Spencer Jones. He went 2 for 2. He went 3 for 3 on Saturday. A top free agent that was still unsigned has his deal. Cody Bellinger staying with the Cubs, 3 years, $80 million. NL MVP for the Dodgers in 2019. He then had some rough seasons, but last season in Chicago, Bellinger hit over 326 home runs. Jake Knapp, 29-year-old PGA Tour rookie, won the golf in Mexico. He qualifies to play the upcoming Masters. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Nathan?
Okay, John, thank you. Now let's get back to what's happening in the nation's capital. The U.S. is now a little bit more than 4 days away from its next partial shutdown deadline, and now President Biden is calling congressional leaders to the White House tomorrow to try to head that off and to free up more than $60 billion in aid to Ukraine that remains locked in a border dispute on Capitol Hill. For that and more that's happening in Washington, D.C., we're joined by Bloomberg News senior editor Bill Ferries. So, Bill, it seems as though the White House was hoping that the 2-year anniversary of Russia's invasion and the death of dissident leader Alexei Navalny would add some more momentum to the Ukraine aid. Is there any evidence that it has that now?
Well, not really. You know, this Ukraine aid is something that we've now been talking about since late last fall, really. At one point, the president was pushing for it to be taken care of before the, end-of-year holidays. And here we are now heading into March, and there's still no sign of a political breakthrough that would free up this $60 billion that Ukraine supporters here and President Volodymyr Zelensky say he needs by really within a month if he's going to keep fending off these Russian offensives on this 1,200-kilometer border that he shares with Russia now. So it's a pretty dire time. But as you mentioned, there's a lot going on in Washington with the possible partial shutdown, and it's not clear that this breakthrough will be able to happen with all that going on.
Does that raise the risk then that we could see a partial government shutdown by the end of the week if they don't come to some kind of agreement on the foreign aid?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you've got this. It's let's say about half a dozen agencies that are involved that would run out of funding this week, and then additional a whole other slew of departments that would face the same fate just a week from now. So those talks have always been contentious. This is, I think, I'll probably get this wrong, but it's at least the third extension on the budget for these agencies. And with an April deadline, a kind of a last-minute deadline, there's not a lot of time for people to find the compromise that they need at this point.
That April 30th deadline, I believe, is when automatic cuts kick in. So time, as they say, is of the essence. In the meantime, Bill, we're watching and waiting for Israel to potentially carry out this offensive against the last Hamas battalions in the southern city of Rafah. We've heard Prime Minister Netanyahu promise that he's going to have a plan to get civilians out of the way. Have we gotten any further signs that that plan is actually going to be put into fruition?
Well, as of yesterday, on Sunday, the Biden administration said that they still hadn't seen any details of what that plan would be in terms of evacuating or moving more than 1 million Palestinians out of Rafah ahead of that offensive. There's still some optimism that talks in Paris might produce some kind of a temporary ceasefire, but Prime Minister Netanyahu has made clear he intends to send his forces into Rafah either before or after that ceasefire is reached. He said it's a critical part of destroying Hamas and ensuring peace, and whether it happens before or afterwards, it's going to happen.
And just to close things out with a lot of developments now in the presidential race, we've heard the Koch network, Americans for Prosperity Action, now saying they're going to divert their resources from supporting Nikki Haley to down ballot races. And now multiple reports that Ronna McDaniel, the chair of the Republican National Committee, is making plans to step down a couple days after Super Tuesday. It seems as though there's even more consolidation around former President Trump's candidacy.
Yeah, I think after the South Carolina primary, the stars are increasingly aligning for Donald Trump to be the de facto nominee. It was a big defeat for Haley in her home state, and there's really been no polling that suggests the results will be any different on Super Tuesday. There's still time. She does still have donors with her. She still has some money, but the odds are appearing longer and longer for her to have any kind of an upset that she can claim to help justify staying in the race even longer.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Amy Morris. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.